really involved with their kids' lives, who micromanage every nanosecond of your life, who take you from soccer practice to trombone lessons to SAT prep classes, who are completely involved in every stage of your life. You know what they call helicopter parents in Scandinavia? This is if you remember nothing else, this you'd tweet about. Here's one of your tweet quotes. Ready? In Scandinavia, they call what we call helicopter parents curling parents. You know that sport called curling, which consists basically of heaving a rock down a bowling alley made of ice and then sliding in front of it with a broom to make sure its path is so clear, so without obstruction, so perfectly easy. That's the curling. You're going to remember. I know you're going to tweet that, Jonathan. It's one of my, if you remember nothing else about what he's, oh, that's interesting, curling, So, but here's the thing about helicopter parents. This micromanaging of everything that happens to you in high school, from the time you're a kid to the time you graduate from high school, actually has created, what we know about you from psychological profiles, is a generation of people who are in some ways less resilient and more risk-averse than previous generations. Young people today, I'm personally from the fall down 7 times, get up 8 school of development. You make a mistake, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, you take responsibility for your action, and you move on. Well, my students are of the don't fall down ever school of development. They are terrified of making one mistake. Mommy and daddy clean up every single mess. They never have had to take responsibility. This is something that was sort of new to me. I can't tell you how many university presidents and deans have told me that they get phone calls from students' parents about the grades their children get on tests, calling the president of the school. That is too much involvement. That is not good parenting. That is over-parenting, right? We can't expect people to be, risk-taking. We can't expect them to be resilient if every single time they even possibly might make a mistake, you have everybody running in to intervene for them to clean up. So one of the things that why is this interesting for this particular stage of development? Because what happens to all these young people, having been so unbelievably over-parented, so that everybody is scrutinizing, you're under constant surveillance, then you come to college, and what has historically been the relationship of grown-ups to young people on college campuses? What you witness on college campuses is the gradual withdrawal of grown-ups in the actual lives of students. When I was in college, this is going to sound very quaint. When I was in college, we had these rules in our dorms. You were allowed to have a member of the opposite sex in your room until 11 o'clock on weeknights and all the way till midnight on weekends. And so I told this to my students recently, and one of them said, so wait, what happens at midnight on weekends? It's like gay party time? All right, the opposite sex is gone. I told you it was going to sound quaint, right? So not only were there times, but if you had a member of the opposite sex in your room during the prescribed times, you had to have your door open the width of a book, and 3 feet had to be on the ground at all times. Now, I'll leave it to you to figure out the acrobatic permutations about the 3 feet on the floor issue. Where the other foot was, for example. And of course, being college students, we were perverse literalists. So when they said we would have the door open the width of a book, we did. We used a matchbook. Now, of course, those rules barely exist on any college campus any longer. Because what you have on college campuses is the gradual withdrawal of grown-ups in the life. My school, the school was in loco parentis. It was your local parent. That doesn't exist hardly at all any longer. So what you have now is young people having been completely over-parented and infantilized, coming into a college where there's no grown-ups at all. And that's why the first-year experience is often a bacchanal. because they're finally able to say, wow, I'm free, I can do anything I want. And they have never had, and they've never lived without the kind of, making their own boundaries, making their own constraints. So, now let me take a moment to gender this just a little bit. What you have then is 17-year-old guys, 18-year-old guys coming to college absolutely desperate to prove that they're men. And who do they want to prove it to? 18-year-old guys. Because what you have on college campuses is, with the absence of grown men in the lives of young people, you only have basically 18-year-olds proving it to 19-year-olds. That can't work. I mean, look, there are many, many cultures throughout the world in which there are very elaborate initiation rituals. You know, any student of anthropology could tell you all of these. There are hundreds of cultures in which there are initiation rituals where young boys do something arduous, some task, some test, and at the end of which time they've proved their masculinity, they're incorporated as a member of the culture. There's one difference between the American college campus and every single other culture that does initiation rituals. And you know what that difference is? In every other culture, it is the adult men who think about the ritual, who plan it, who execute it, and who are there at the other end of it saying, yes, now you're a man. Only in the United States do we let the boys do it for themselves. That's when the military leader will say, I know you're going to do some hazing now. I can't know about it. I'm going away for the weekend. That's when the coach says, I need plausible deniability. Don't tell me what you do with the rookies. That's when the fraternity advisor says, I can't know about this. Don't tell me. So what you have basically is 18-year-olds proving it to 19-year-olds. That cannot work, which is why our culture ends up with a kind of relentlessness, a constant repetition of these rituals over and over again. Whereas in these other cultures, you do it once, done, over, you're a man. But here we do it over and over again because it cannot possibly work. So now I'll come back to the sort of both genders for a moment. So the fourth thing that's driving this, that has created this new stage of development, is the changes in women's lives. And this last one I'm going to spend a significant amount of time talking about. Now I've set the background. Because it's incontestable that women's lives have changed fundamentally in the past, say, 25 or 30 years. And that, I think, is part of the backdrop. Because remember, what I'm talking about, this is really important because you've probably heard some of these kinds of arguments before. I am not talking about some Peter Pan syndrome where people are refusing to grow up in a state of perpetual adolescence. I'm talking about the Peter Panic syndrome, where young guys are desperate to prove their masculinity to anyone they can find to prove it to. So it's quite a bit different. So the changes in women's lives also forms a foundation for this. And let me spend a few minutes talking about that. I'm going to suggest that there are different ways in which we can talk about women's lives having changed. But I'm going to point to four of them that I think sort of form the framework of this for men. The first one is very simple, very obvious to everybody in this room. Women made gender visible. We now know that gender is one of the organizing principles of social life. That gender is one of the foundation building blocks of your identity. 40 years ago, we didn't know this. 40 years ago, if you went to graduate school and said you wanted to study gender, there wasn't one course you could take. In fact, in my field, in sociology, if you said you wanted to study women 40 years ago, there was one course you could take. It's called Marriage and the Family. For years, that was like the ladies' auxiliary of the social sciences. Today, of course, there's women's studies courses, gender studies courses on every campus in the country. But it's very recent. You may not know this. The first women's studies program was founded exactly 40 years ago, in 1972, at San Diego State. It's that recent. That's the first area of change. The second one, of course, is the workplace. Women have entered the workplace in unprecedented numbers. Exactly half of the labor force today is female. This is an enormous change in our, let me ask you, how many of the women in this room who are students here at Drury, how many of you expect to have full-time jobs outside the home when you graduate from here? Let me see your hands. Okay, now please keep your hands up if your mother has or had a full-time job for at least 10 years without an interruption. This is your mother's. Okay, how about grandmothers? Okay, so let me just say, here's what I saw. I saw virtually every woman's hand go up when I asked about you. I saw about half the hands up for mom, and I saw about 4 hands up for women, for grandma. In 3 generations, you see in this room that women's expectations and experience in the labor force have changed fundamentally. Now, what would happen if I said the same thing to the men? How many of you expect to have full-time jobs outside the home when you graduate from college? It's okay, we knew that, thank you. And your hands would stay up for hand would stay up for dad and grandpa, et cetera, because men's relationship to the workplace hasn't changed very much at all. And that's led to a 3rd area of change in women's lives. That's the balance between work and family. Women used to think that they had to choose between having careers and having family lives. Today, of course, women are absolutely unwilling to make that choice. They expect to have careers and they expect to have families. They want to balance. They want to have it all. And the 4th area of change, also important for our purposes now, the 4th area of change is around sexuality. Now, this is the hardest one for us guys to wrap our heads around, because we thought the sexual revolution was all about us. I mean, the sexual revolution promised more access to more partners with fewer commitments. Could you get a more masculine sexual revolution than that? But if you look at the mountain of sex research data that has been collected over the past 40 years, there's only one conclusion you would come to, and that is it is women's sexuality that's changed, not men's. And the easiest way to describe this change in women's sexuality is to say women today feel entitled to pleasure. Women know that they can like sex, want sex, go for it, get horny. And I'm not talking here about some like bohemian enclave in Greenwich Village or San Francisco. I'm talking about mainstream American mall-going, Victoria's Secret-wearing women all over the country. This idea of sexual entitlement, of entitlement to pleasure, of finding your own sexual voice, finding out what you like. So these are 4 very big areas of change in women's life: identity, work, family, intimacy. While women's lives have changed so fundamentally in the past, say, 30, 40 years, what's been happening with men? Well, the easy answer that you're probably saying to yourself is, not a whole hell of a lot. That's half true. I think men's lives, of course, have changed a lot. My father went to an all-male college, served in an all-male military, and spent his entire working life in an all-male work environment. Well, I would say to the men in this room, that world is gone. There are only 3 all-male colleges left in America. There is no more all-male military, and as of today, no more all-male military. And, because today, as you know, women are finally allowed to serve in forward combat positions. And there's virtually no job that a man in this room is going to have in which he won't have a female colleague, co-worker, or boss. So men's lives have changed. What has not changed, and here's the key, what has not changed is the ideology of masculinity. Young men of college age today subscribe to the same ideology of masculinity that I did when I was in college, that my dad did when he was in college. The ideology of masculinity has remained relatively constant. One psychologist came up with what he called the 4 basic rules of manhood. So if any of the guys in here are having any doubts or questions, just memorize these. Do them all the time. That's really important. And you'll be okay. Here's number 1. Just get this one right, okay? No sissy stuff. You can never do anything that even remotely hints of femininity. Masculinity is the relentless repudiation of the feminine. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2, be a big wheel. We measure your masculinity by the size of your paycheck, wealth, power, status. Do you ever see that bumper sticker, he who has the most toys when he dies wins? That's the 2nd rule. 3rd rule of masculinity, be a sturdy oak. What makes a man is that he's reliable in a crisis. What makes him reliable in a crisis is that he resembles an inanimate object. You know, a rock, a pillar. And 4th rule, give him hell. Exude an aura of daring and aggression. Live life on the edge. Take risks. Go for it. Those are the 4 basic rules of manhood. Now, what I want to do for a minute is I want to sort of suggest some of the things that I think are keeping men in the place that we are, and then look at how we deal with that in this place called Guyland. So now I'm going to start to gender it. Let me take those 4 rules, and let me sort of focus a little bit on two separate issues. First, when I say that women made gender visible, I think the problem remains that women made gender visible, that gender is now visible mostly to women. When I say the word gender, what gender do you think of? Women. Most men don't know that gender is as important to us as women understand it is to them. And that's political. Let me tell you my own story of how I started thinking about this. This is a story that takes place 30 years ago when I was a graduate student and could not possibly happen today for reasons that will instantly become obvious. But 30 years ago, I was a graduate student, and graduate students, we always get so excited about all these new ideas, go running down the halls. Did you see this article? No other people on the face of the earth do this. But graduate students get excited about the strangest things. A bunch of us were sitting around one day, and we said, there is an explosion of writing and thinking in feminist theory, but there's no courses yet. So we did what graduate students typically do in such a situation. We said, let's have a study group. Every week we'll read some text, we'll have a meeting, we'll have a potluck, we'll get together, we'll talk about it. So each week, 11 women and me got together, and we would read some text, and we would talk about it. And during one of our meetings, I witnessed a conversation between two women that changed my life forever. One woman was white, and one woman was black. This is the part that's going to sound really anachronistic. The white woman said, remember this is 30 years ago, the white woman said, all women have the same experience as women. All women are, face the same oppression, and therefore all women have a kind of intuitive solidarity or sisterhood. And the black woman said, I'm not so sure. Let me ask you a question. So the black woman says to the white woman, when you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror, what do you see? And the white woman said, I see a woman. And the black woman said, you see, that's the problem for me. Because when I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror, she said, I see a black woman. To me, race is visible. But to you, race is invisible. You don't see it. And then she said something really startling. She said, that's how privilege works. Privilege is invisible to those who have it. It is a luxury, I would say, to the white people sitting in this room not to have to think about race every split second of our lives. Privilege is invisible to those who have it. You'll tweet that. Actually, not long ago, this is a line that I've been using for a long time, and last year, this is really flattering and a little creepy. I got an email from a woman who had just graduated from college in Canada. And she said, I just graduated from college, and I decided to buy myself a graduation gift, and I'm sending you a picture of it. And I'm going, oh, God. And it's a picture only of her bicep, on which she has tattooed, privilege is invisible to those who have it. So this line of mine that I've been using is now indelibly inscribed on her skin, which I said is very flattering and a little creepy. So anyhow, but that's it. So when I heard this, I kind of went, oh. And somebody said, well, what was that reaction? And I said, well, when I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror, I see a human being. I'm kind of the generic person. I'm a middle-class white man. I have no race, no class, no gender. I'm universally generalizable. So I like to think that was the moment I became a middle-class white man. That class and race and gender were not about other people, but they were also about me, and I had to start thinking about them, and it had been privilege that had kept it invisible to me for so long. Now, 30 years ago, I'd like to tell you that this story ends 30 years ago in that little discussion group, but I was reminded of it quite recently. I have a female colleague at Stony Brook where I teach, and she and I both teach the sociology of gender course, and we alternate semesters. So whenever it's my turn to teach it, she always comes to give a lecture for me. Whenever it's her turn, I give a guest lecture for her. So I walk into her class, about 300 students, to give a guest lecture, and one of the students looks up at me and goes, oh, finally an objective opinion. All that semester, whenever my female colleague opened her mouth, what my students saw was a woman. I mean, Katie, if you were to stand up in front of my students and say, there is structural inequality based on gender in the United States, they'd say, oh, of course you'd say that. You're a woman. You're biased. When I say it, they go, well, that's interesting. Is that going to be on the test? How do you spell structural? So I think this is important. I hope everybody in the back can see. This is what objectivity looks like. Disembodied Western rationality, that's me. And that's why, just to throw this out there, this is why I think if I am going to embody disembodied Western rationality, you gotta have a signifier. That's why men wear ties. Because you need a signifier that basically says this is what objectivity looks like. And what could be a better signifier of disembodied Western rationality than a garment that at one end is a noose and the other end points to the genitals? This right here is mind-body dualism. That's its purpose. Cuts the head off from the body. So, why is this so important? Because it seems to me, let's take that first rule of manhood, no sissy stuff, because we've got to find a way to make gender visible to young boys and young men. To give young boys and young men a way to feel safe and secure and confident in their masculinity, so that they don't have to keep proving it every single minute, where masculinity doesn't become something that has to be relentlessly tested, relentlessly proved, relentlessly called out every single moment, because everyone in this room knows full well that fear of being seen as a sissy, that you know that the number one most common put down in every single middle school, every single high school, and every single college in the United States of America today is, "That's so gay." It is so pervasive, and we now think that "that's so gay" has now somehow become detached from gay people. It simply means bad or wrong or dumb or whatever. "That's so gay" doesn't mean, it no longer refers to gay people. So if I say, "Oh, dude, that hat is so gay," nudge him. Yeah. You would know, or I would assume you would know, that I'm not saying, "I believe you may have erotic interests in members of your gender." You would know I'm saying it looks bad, wrong, right? You'd know that, right? Okay. Well, don't believe me. Listen to the words of my favorite gender theorist in America, Eminem. Now, let me say, I'm going to read a passage from Eminem now, and let me just say, this is Eminem before he has his great gay awakening. If those of you who know anything about Eminem's career, in 2002, when 8 Mile came out, there is a pivotal scene outside the factory gates by the food truck in which a gay man is being harassed by other guys. And Rabbit, Eminem, actually intervenes to defend him. This is his great moment. Up until that moment, every single song had faggot this and faggot that. Suddenly, after 2002, he's completely okay with gay men. Still not so great on women. January 2010, he was interviewed in Esquire about being a grown-up. Right? He's now 32 at the time. He's 32 years old. He's not, he's not in Guyland anymore. And so this is what he says. This is a verbatim quote in 2010. He said, "I'm a t-shirt guy now, but wife beaters won't go out of style because the bitches keep mouthing off." Okay, so he's not so good on women, but he's much better on gay men now. But prior to this, in 2002, he's asked in an interview, like, "What is up with you and gay men? Why is every single song faggot this and faggot that?" And this is what he says. "The lowest degrading thing you can say to a man is call him a faggot and take away his manhood. Call him a sissy, call him a punk. Faggot to me doesn't mean gay people. Faggot to me just means taking away your manhood." So I hope you all hear that. It's not about sexual orientation, it's about gender. It's about taking away your manhood. So this whole discourse about homophobia is about taking away your manhood. Now, this, I think, is, and so I think this is a particularly important part of Guyland, is the foundation in male-male relationships of homophobia. How foundational it is, how frightened we are of other men judging us. We spend an enormous amount of time and energy as young men worrying about whether or not anything we could possibly be doing could be possibly misinterpreted as gay. There's a tremendous amount of pressure and gender policing. Just when I was in, I don't know if this is true for you guys, but when I was in middle school, you know how middle school students get like They take one, like, science factoid, and they immediately take it to, like, the most perverse place. So in middle school, we heard, this is what we heard. We heard, your instinctive reaction reveals your true self. I still don't quite know what that means, but at the time, here's what we took it to mean. We took it to mean that before you have time to think about your reaction, how you instinctively react will reveal something deep about you. So, in 8th grade, we went right out onto the playground to test the validity of this proposition. We would walk up behind a guy and say, look at your fingernails. Most of the men now know what I'm talking about, do you not? If you look at your fingernails like this, it's okay. Look at them like this, beat them up. Look at the bottom of your shoes. Okay, not okay. How we walk, how we talk, how we dress, how we move, how we look at the bottom of our shoes. Think about the energy that we have spent policing ourselves, knowing we are being policed by others. We could have cured cancer with all of this energy. But we spend it policing ourselves constantly, relentlessly, because we know we are being constantly and relentlessly policed. So this is an important piece of Guyland. There's one more piece that I want to add to it, and then I want to go inside of Guyland. And that piece has to do a little bit with workplace. I'm going to tell you another story about my own development in this. I was on a TV talk show. I did not confess my doping to her, but you know, by academics tend to be very bad talk show guests. We don't get invited very often because, you know, the typical talk show format is very polarized. Yes, no, us, them, black, white. And academics get up and they go, well, it's a little more complicated than that. You know, that is bad TV. So we don't get invited very often. But there I was on this show. I was opposite 4 angry white men. 4 men who believed that they were the victims of reverse discrimination, also known as affirmative action. That they were qualified for jobs, they were qualified for promotions, they didn't get them because some undeserving other person got them. And I was there kind of as the balance. And the title of the show, the whole reason I'm telling you this story, the title of the show is a quote from one of these 4 guys. And the title of the show was, "A Black Woman Stole My Job." And they all told their stories about how they were qualified for jobs, qualified for promotions, didn't get them, they were really angry. And then it's my turn to speak. And so I said, look, I have just one question for you guys about the title of the show, "A Black Woman Stole My Job." Actually, it's a question about one word in the title. I want to know about the word "my." Where did you get the idea it was your job? Why isn't the title of the show, "A Black Woman Got the Job"? A black woman got a job. Because without confronting men's sense of entitlement, we'll never understand why so many men think that equality is a loss for men. This idea that was our job, that they took it. Look, we think this is a level playing field. So any policy that tilts it even a little bit, we think, oh my God, water's rushing uphill. It's reverse discrimination against us. Let's be clear. White men in America are the beneficiaries of the single greatest affirmative action program in the history of the world. It's called the history of the world. So I think, so this sense of entitlement is an important piece also in Guyland. Now that I've set this up, this second third, let me go inside it a little bit. The book, Guyland itself as a book, is basically a catalog of all of the things guys do to prove their masculinity, mostly to other guys, hoping that by proving it to other guys, it will somehow rebound onto themselves and that they will feel like they proved their manhood successfully. So there's a chapter on sports, chapter on video games, chapter on binge drinking, hooking up, all kinds of other things. And there's a chapter, of course, on initiation. And I'm going to read you a passage about it because I think that it's important now to understand what men are willing to do in order to prove their masculinity, because you want to, and then to interrogate it a little bit. So I'm just going to read you a few paragraphs from this. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about a place that seems to be gender equal, and then I'll conclude by talking about the position of women in Guyland. So, right, and let me just say, when I did this research, I mixed and matched all the schools and all the names. So, although this passage happens to say Jason at the University of Georgia, his name wasn't Jason, and this wasn't at the University of Georgia, but this is a ritual I actually did witness. The fraternity in question actually invited me to come watch their initiation. So, Jason, a freshman at the University of Georgia, has been waiting all semester for this night. He's put up with a lot of humiliating abuse from the brothers, done mountains of their laundry, made their beds, and even written a paper for the pledge master. He's mopped up vomit-stained bathrooms at the fraternity house on the morning after parties, done stupid things, and drank a bit more, okay, a lot more, than he ever did in high school. One more night, and he's sure he'll be in. The pledges gather in the rec room at about 10 p.m. Dressed as instructed in old t-shirts and jeans, they were told to bring flip-flops, a change of clothes, and a jockstrap. An anxious frivolity permeates the room as the brothers drink beer with the pledges. After everyone seems good and drunk, the brothers swarm over the pledges, yelling their demands to recite the fraternity mission statement, rituals, and membership information. Screw it up, the brothers yell, and you might not make it. Calisthenics of a sort follow. Push-ups, then chugging some beers. Sit-ups, more chugging. Most of the pledges are ready to puke. They're then told to strip naked and stand in a straight line, one behind the other, which is hard enough given how much they've already had to drink. Each pledge is ordered to reach his right hand between his legs to the pledge standing behind him and grab that guy's penis, and then place his left hand on the shoulder of the guy in front of him. Can you visualize this? Let me just help you out here. So you reach your right hand through your legs, grab the penis of the guy behind you, put your left hand on the shoulder as he backs into you to grab yours. Then you make a circle in what is called the elephant walk, and you walk around like that for a few minutes. Okay. By now it's nearly 2 a.m. Okay, you worthless pieces of shit, the pledge master screams. Now let's see if you're willing to give it all for the brotherhood. Still naked, the pledges stumble to the second floor balcony of the house. The brothers measure out lengths of rope, and a cinder block is tied to the end of each so that it almost, but not quite, touches the ground. The pledges are blindfolded as the other ends of the rope are tied to the base of each pledge's penis. If your dick isn't big enough, you're not getting into this house. This block is going to rip it the fuck off your body. How do you like that, you little weenies? That's what the pledge master says. Each pledge feels a little tug on his rope, and then he hears the cinder blocks being lifted up to the edge of the balcony. The next thing he knows, he feels a sharp tug, and he hears the cinder block being pushed off the edge and crashing to the ground below. One guy screams and starts to cry. Another pisses. Blindfolds are removed, and the brothers are laughing their heads off. Turns out the ropes weren't really tied to those blocks after all. They embrace their new brothers, and it's over. Jason has made it. Now, for a moment, imagine you are an anthropologist from Mars. And imagine that this was your fieldwork. And now you are addressing the Martian Anthropological Society. And your first statement is, they're all gay. I mean, they're marching around holding each other's penis. They're absolutely preoccupied with penis size. What's going on with this? So the first rule of homophobia is the more obviously homoerotic the behavior, the more you have to layer upon layer upon layer of homophobia so that nobody but nobody could possibly ever get the right idea. It is a colossal smoke and mirrors. But the second question that you would be asking yourself is this. Why on earth would they do this? Why on earth would young men put themselves through such obviously humiliating ritual abuse for other guys who are basically the same age as they are? Why would they do this? And there are 3 words. These are the 3 words that define Guyland for young men. They are the 3 words that provide them the motivation and the benefit. This is the payoff. And those 3 words, which I heard on every campus in the country, are very simple. Bros before hoes. I heard it everywhere. What does bros before hoes mean to young men? It means 2 things. 1, it means the bonds of brotherhood are so tight, so permanent, so durable, that you never betray the brotherhood. Those are the bonds that will define your life for the rest of your life. Far more important than any woman. You get solidarity. And at the same time, what you also get is women can't do this. So you get hierarchy. We're superior to women, and we have that. So you get both horizontal bonding and vertical hierarchy at the same time. That's what those three words mean. And by the way, women, I will tell you, chicks before dicks does not quite have the same power, does it? No. This is very important to guys. So this is why guys do it. Now, let me go inside this for just one moment and suggest, now let me look at a place where women and men on college campus in this new stage of development are doing something that looks to be gender equal. And then let me suggest how it's gender unequal. And that is, let me talk about campus sexual behavior for a bit. One of the things I learned as I went across the country is that everywhere I went, everybody said that, I know it's different everywhere else, but here, people don't date, they hook up. So, and I heard this everywhere. So I figured, okay, this is pretty obvious. And here I'm not just drawing on my 400 interviews. I've been involved in a quantitative study, a survey of young people on college campuses all across the country. We have an N of about 20,000 young people who have filled out an online survey of sexual behavior. So we have a pretty good sample now. And I'll tell you what we know, what we, professors and researchers know about hooking up. Here's the first thing we know. The phrase itself, hooking up, is very vague. It's deliberately vague. You don't really know exactly what happened. It's anything from making out to intercourse. And so this serves both women and men. Because if I say to my guy friends, I hooked up with Jessica, they all think, oh, he had intercourse with her, I'm a stud. But she will add the magic word only, as in, I only hooked up with him. And her female friends will say, okay, you didn't have intercourse, you did a lot of other things, but you didn't have intercourse, you're not a slut. So she's not a slut, he is a stud, everybody wins. That's the first thing, it's deliberately vague. The second thing about hooking up is it is almost always accompanied by copious amounts of alcohol. This is not simply because people look better, sexier when you're wearing beer goggles, but also because everybody wants plausible deniability for the very things that they want to do in the first place. The third thing is it's very homosocial, by which I mean he goes to a bar with his guy friends. She goes to the same bar with her girlfriends. There the two groups meet, much frivolity ensues, and at the end of the evening, around 11 o'clock or so, or midnight, he says to her, can I walk you home? That's the beginning of the hookup. And the fourth, so it seems to be spontaneous. What we found in our surveys, though, is that spontaneity is a bit different. She goes to the bar thinking, will I hook up tonight? And he goes to the bar saying, with whom will I hook up tonight? So for her, it's a yes or no, am I going to? And for him, it's simply with whom. The final thing is hooking up has no expectation of anything in the future. You hook up, and there's no expectation that you're dating, that you're going out, that there's anything more than this. And so there comes a time after you've hooked up with somebody a couple of times, and now I'm going to begin to show how this is gender unequal, where you've hooked up with somebody a couple of times, and somebody has to sort of say, so like, are we going out? Are we like a couple? Do you want to plan to do this next time? Wasn't bad for me. Maybe we should plan it. That means the hooking up is over. This conversation is almost always called, in most places it's called the talk. Have you had the talk yet? At Stanford they call it the DTR, define the relationship. And it is almost 100% women who initiate the talk. Because because once you have the talk, you can't hook up anymore because the spontaneity is gone. Now, you can do other things. You can have a booty call. You can be friends with benefits. You can actually date. Well, remarkable concept. But you could actually do that. But you can't hook up anymore. So she initiates it. He avoids it. So a bunch of us researchers were sitting around doing our survey analysis, and we were starting to think, like, everybody is so unbelievably sloppy drunk. Can the sex be any good? I know, we're interested in quality. Can it be any good? So we thought, all right, let's ask. So we developed some measures of, rough measures of good, whether it was any good. We decided to ask, did you have an orgasm at your last hookup? And did your partner have an orgasm at last hookup? What we found was about 2/3 of the men and 1/3 of the women had an orgasm at last hookup. And this, which was pretty typical. We figured that was a fairly typical. But here's what we also found. We found that the women said, yes, about 2/3 of the women said, yes, my partner had an orgasm at last hookup, which is to say, they read it right. But about the men dramatically overestimated the orgasms of their female partners by a factor of nearly 3. About 80% of the men said, yes, my partner had an orgasm at last hookup. And we thought, this is a little weird. What, is it possible, and this is the big payoff, is it possible that this unbelievably sexually empowered generation of young women who know what they want and they know how to get it is actually faking it? So we started asking in our interviews, and here's what we found. We found, in fact, that some of the women were, in fact, faking it. Here's what one said. One woman said, I did it, quote, to make that person feel good, to make them feel like they'd done their job. Another woman said she faked it just really to end it, because I was, like, bored with it. Now, this last quote, I think this is the most revealing quote in the entire book. This one woman says at the end, she says, it was like trying so hard to make me come, and there was like no way it was going to happen. I felt so bad for him. I mean, I had gone down on him, and he came already, and he was like trying to be such a good sport about it, but really, so I just faked it, and he felt good, and I felt relieved. Now, what I want you to hear in that little narrative is how this woman, who is fully sexually agentic, has her own sexual voice, knows her body well enough to know that, you know, there's no way it's going to happen. But where does she go there? Does she go to that fully sexually agentic, full voice saying, you know, get back to work, Buster, or try this, or, you know, let me do this? No, she says, I felt so bad for him. She immediately retreats to a very traditional feminine position. Now she's going to take, she did not get what she wanted, and now she's going to take care of him emotionally at the same time. So she retreats to a completely feminine posture. Now this is an illustration not of gender equality, but of gender inequality, right? When you're talking about faking orgasms, when you're talking about, you know, the orgasm gap itself, the orgasm perception gap. But let me go even further to suggest to you some of the ways in which the sexual behavior of young people, everybody says, well, the women and men are doing it equally, so it must be gender equal. Well, let me tell you, here, think about this one. Most of you probably remember this. Most of you who are students will remember this. About 5 or 6 years ago, when you were like in high school or middle school, and one day, this is about 5 or 6 years ago, your parents probably came running into your bedroom. And they, because all across the country, every TV show and every newspaper and radio show, you probably remember this yourself, I bet you wrote the story, was the epidemic of oral sex among teenagers. Do you remember the epidemic of oral sex among teenagers? Like, it was like a disease you could catch. I don't want to catch oral sex. It's like an epidemic out there. A lot of the fathers I talked to when I was doing Guyland would be very happy to catch that disease. And here's the thing that we found. Like, there was this terrible, you know, unbelievable, and do you remember this? And any of you, like the epidemic of oral sex? Oh my God. And then, you remember this? This is one of the great urban myth stories of the past 15 years. Do you remember rainbow parties? She's going, oh yeah, oh my God, I remember those. But you never went to one, because you know what? They never existed. You know what a rainbow party was? It was a middle school thing. How many of you do not know what a rainbow party was? All right, I'll tell you. A rainbow party was a middle school thing, and all the girls would wear different shades of lipstick, hence the rainbow, to the party, at which point they would all perform oral sex on the boys, and then the boys at the end of the night would compare all the different shades of lipstick. Right, and you're sitting to yourself going, what? Because, and here's how you know this never happened. 1, because lipstick smudges. What were they thinking? They're going to be like concentric circles? You know, this is either a fantasy of people who have never had oral sex or have no idea about how Revlon works, right? It doesn't smear here. Secondly, here's how we really know it didn't work. Because at the end of the night, I'm not going up and saying, let me see yours. Not a chance. It's a complete urban myth, but here's the thing. Think about what that phrase means. The epidemic of oral sex, gender neutral. Here's what we know about teenagers and oral sex. There is no appreciable rise whatsoever prior to age 18. And you want to have a social life on some campuses that are so fraternity dominated, that's pretty much the only social life in town, that you know if you go to that party, there's going to be 2 or 3 guys at the door deciding whether you get into the party or not. So here's your choice. You can conform to what they say you should act like, dress like, dance like, and drink like, or you can resist it. If you conform to it, you will get into the party. If you don't, you will not get into the party. Here's your choice, ladies, bitch or babe. It's up to you. Want to have a social life? Here's what you have to do in order to do that. So we're now in a realm of dramatic gender inequality, aren't we? And this is not simply on you. This is on us. We have done this institutionally. We have allowed the kind of institutional framework to exist where men's power is reproduced. So we decide. And here's a good illustration of the position of women in Guyland. This is a sorority ritual. It's called Circle the Fat. Have any of you ever heard of this? You know this? Okay. I'll tell you about it. It's very short. This is a sorority ritual. This one comes from a university in Northern California, and it's a narrative by a woman who went through this. So here's the setup. The pledges, the women, come into the living room of the sorority house, and all the windows basically have big sheets over them, and the blinds are drawn so no one could possibly see in from the street. And they're told to strip to their underwear, and they're blindfolded, and they lie face down on the floor of the living room. And the sisters, the members of the sorority, are all dressed in long white robes, giving a kind of air of solemnity to the occasion. And then this is what happens. So you got the idea that all the pledges are lying face down, blindfolded in their underwear, and this is what she says. And that's when the men entered the room, whistling and howling. The men circled us. I was becoming disoriented and felt nauseated. Something smelled toxic. Then something cold came in contact with my thigh. I gasped. It's okay, baby, said one of the men. I'm just helping to make you look good. The cold moved to my inner thigh. Some women quivered, cried out, or winced. The fraternity guys are here to help us all become better sisters, the chapter president says. You need to hold still and be quiet. Okay, so it's over. The guys leave. The women, still blindfolded in their underwear, are now led upstairs to the second floor of the sorority house, which has what's called the education room. The education room is simply a bedroom with all the furniture moved out, and 3 floor-to-ceiling mirrors are on the 3 walls. At that point, their blindfolds are taken off. This is what she writes. There was a moment of confusion as each of us noticed the circles and X's that had been drawn on our bodies in permanent marker. These are areas that need some work, the pledge master says. When one girl starts to sob, one of the sisters scoffs, oh, don't be a ninny. This is just going to make you a better person. So here, literally, the men are writing on the bodies of the women how to make them a better person. That is to say, more compliant with the men's definition of what these women should look like. And yet, the American college campus, there is no place in America outside of the offices of Ms. Magazine that is more gender equal. And yet, this is so remarkably, paradoxically, so remarkably gender unequal. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to give you a map of this new stage of development, and I've tried to suggest some of the reasons that it's come into being. And now I want to conclude just with a couple of words about the fact that this is not a critique of young people. What I want to do is I want to engage all of us, adults and young people, parents and their children, in a conversation about the world that we are expecting you to inhabit, the one that you actually inhabit. The grown-up people need to do far more listening to what's actually happening, far less lecturing about what you should be doing. We need to re-examine the ways in which we've organized our social institutions that reproduce the very problems that we're trying to eliminate. This is not a conversation about blaming young people, or especially blaming young men, but rather one of compassion for the very things that young men are being asked to do in the name of masculinity, and asked to do over and over and over again. So this is a conversation, it seems to me, that we need to be having throughout the country, because otherwise I think this new stage of development will simply let us languish. So thank you very much.